everybody. Thanks for joining me for another installment of Intuitive Tea, where we're going to talk about everything the intuitive, the paranormal, the weird, the unexplained. Nothing's off the table. So, today, let's talk past lives, specifically my very first past life recall when I was only 4 years old. I didn't realize until I was almost a teenager that anybody else in my family believed in past lives. My grandmother had a past life recall of being a princess in ancient Egypt. And apparently, she used to talk about it a lot until a lot of family members started giving her hassle about it. And so then she kind of stopped talking about it, but you could tell from her book collection where her passion was. And that was with ancient Egypt. She had books about, King Tut and just ancient Egypt in general. The civilization just fascinated her. My mom had a past life recall of being a lady in the Victorian era with two boys. In this lifetime, she has two girls, but in that one, she had the opposite. And I think it was a pretty happy lifetime for her. And then my dad, and he's the first one to say that he believed in past lives because I don't remember what we were talking about. I think I found an old cassette tape of his that said past life hypnosis or something like that. And I asked him about it. And he said he had an experience where he recalled a past life where he had fallen overboard. It was a long time ago. It was a really old wooden sailing ship with a tall mast and the big sails. And he said he somehow had fallen overboard and he remembered calling for them to come back because he's watching the ship continue on. It's like no one even knew he fell overboard. And so presumably he drowned, he died. To this day, my dad will look at the ocean, but he will not go in it. And he hates deep water. So a lot of things that have no explanation in this lifetime can actually be tied to a past life. And one day we'll talk even more in depth about it. But let's get on to mine. It was 1974, and I had never heard of past lives. This wasn't a conversation that anyone ever had with me because I was a toddler still. You don't have deep, meaningful conversations about life and the mysteries of the universe with a 4 year old. But we were living in Colorado Springs, Colorado, at the Air Force Academy at the time. My dad was stationed there as an air traffic controller, and we were there from 1974 to 1978. It was a morning where I had this dream. I woke up, noticed that my sister was still asleep in her bed because we shared a room, and the sun was just pouring in through the window. And I remember feeling so drained, like I had been awake running around all night. And so I remember going back to sleep. And when I did, the dream started all over again, right from the very beginning and went to the very end. When it got to the end, I woke up again, saw my sister was still asleep, saw the sun still coming through the window, wondering when my mom was going to come and make us get out of bed. And then I fell back asleep again. And this happened multiple times. I don't remember how many times exactly because I wasn't keeping count, but it was a lot. And I always went back to the same exact dream starting over again. In this dream, I was a boy. And in my mind, I just simply accepted that, okay, I'm a boy. I didn't question it or think it was weird or anything. But I remember looking down, and the one thing I did think was weird was my clothing. I kept going, well, that looks funny, And I remember standing inside a house. It was a very, very small house with very low ceilings and this huge fireplace that I just automatically understood that's where we cooked, that's where we heated the home, that's where everything happened. It was sparsely furnished. I remember seeing a table and some chairs, and then a couple more chairs right in front of the fireplace, but nothing like we have now. And there was no decor on the wall. I am all about the wall decor. But in this dream, the walls were bare. And I remember hearing something behind me, and I looked around, and it was my brother coming through a door. It was a wooden door. And I just understood that this older kid was my brother. And I also understood that I was older in this dream than I was in real life. I was a 4 year old, but in my dream, I knew I was between the ages of 8 to 10, probably closer to 10. And this older boy was probably between the ages of 13 and 15. I just automatically accepted that this was my brother. And I remember him wanting me to come with him. We had something we had to go do, he kept saying, and he had a rifle in his hands. And so at first I was like, I don't think I'm allowed to go. And he says, you need to come with me. Well, I don't remember anything that happened from there to the time we were sneaking up behind this rock. But the next thing I know, we're coming out of some woods and we're sneaking up behind this big, like, boulder. And, if we stood up, we would be taller than the boulder. But if we hunkered down, we would be well hidden. And I remember as we're coming up, I could see in the like a short distance away, there was this, what probably was an estate before that had just been destroyed and burned. And there was like one frame still up, though the rest was just destruction. And the wreckage was still smoldering. It still had, wisps of smoke coming up, and you could smell the burning. There was like a property wall, low stone wall that marked the boundaries of the property, was destroyed in many places around it. And I could see all these soldiers in red coats milling around, walking around, poking in the ashes, talking with each other. And they were starting to gather in this big quad or courtyard area that this estate had. And I knew that, just automatically understood that there was, a stone walkway and things like that. And I asked my brother, why are we here? And he said, we're going to kill King George. So when I tell you now, we go. And I'm like, I didn't see a king. Now, as a little girl in Colorado Springs, having this dream, I didn't know who the hell King George was. I wasn't in school yet learning American and British history. But in my dream, I understood exactly who he was. And all I saw were soldiers. And I told my brother that there's no King George there. It was the first time I got a really good look at his face. And his eyes were really crazed and his mouth was like distorted. And I don't know if he was having some kind of mental breakdown or rage or what was going on, but he was going to go kill what he said was King George. In hindsight, maybe he was just talking about a British soldier, any British soldier. But in this lifetime, I remember thinking, he's nuts. And that was the first time I felt this fear, this pure, raw fear, this pit in my stomach that something really bad was going to happen. And I started to tell him, I want to go home. I want to go home. I don't want to be here. I want to go home. And he kept having his hand on my shoulder to make me stay because I kept trying to leave to go home. And I was so scared. I remember shaking really bad and wondering, I don't even have a rifle. He's the only one with the rifle. What am I going to do? And finally, he had popped his head up and was looking, just right above the rock to see out. And then he looked down at me and he said, now. And when he said now, he started to jump up. At the same time, I saw a big shadow come over both of us. And I looked up because I was still hunkered down. And that's all I remember. My entire world went black. And I understood in that dream I had died. When I would wake up at that point, as a 4-year-old little girl, I understood that I died. I didn't question it. It's just, I accepted this all as fact. So this repeated over and over and over again. And finally, mom came and got us out of bed and told us it was time to get up. And I went about my day. I didn't even think about it anymore. I went and had my cereal, probably watched some cartoons, probably went outside and played with my friends, you know, kid stuff. It wasn't until the following year, 1975, in autumn of 1975, Schoolhouse Rock came out with America Rock, where they talked about, they did these musical little cartoon videos for kids to teach them about our history of America and, civics, how all that goes and everything. And I remember seeing the cartoon characters and I was like, oh my gosh, they're wearing the same funny clothing. And then I realized, well, that meant, that's what I had a dream about. But again, I wasn't fully understanding yet. And I didn't really understand the Revolutionary War yet, except for what was shown in these cartoons. Well, 1976 rolls around, and I'm starting kindergarten. Like after I should have, because in Colorado Springs at the time, you had to be 5 by the time October 31st came around. Well, my birthday wasn't until the next month in November. So I had to wait until the 1976 year to start kindergarten. And about that time, our nation was celebrating its 200th year anniversary. It was the bicentennial of the nation. And my dad started collecting these beautiful porcelain decanters made of the founding fathers. I believe McCormick is who put these out to celebrate the bicentennial. And so he had all these whiskey or bourbon statuettes of George Washington, Paul Revere, Patrick Henry, John Paul Jones, Betsy Ross. I mean, just these beautiful decanters. And I remember looking at the names and looking at the clothing and thinking, this is so familiar. I feel like I should know them. I don't know who they are, but I feel like I should know them. And so by the time I, started kindergarten, well, we're learning how to read barely. We're reading the Dick and Jane books, see Spot Run, Run Spot Run. And so we would go to the library and we had to stay in the little, the first readers book section. And I kept trying to wander off because I knew about libraries and I knew you could find whatever you wanted to know about in there. So I was trying to wander off into the big kids section because I wanted books. I knew I would know what I was looking for once I saw pictures. If I saw the same funny clothing, I know I would have it. And but the teacher and the librarian would catch me every time and say, those books are too old for you. You need to go back over here. So I'd be all frustrated and everything and have to go sit with my friends and read dumb beginners reader books, And so when I got older and could check out those big books, I got everything I could find on the Revolutionary War. It was like an obsession of mine. I read everything. My grandparents started collecting the John Jakes books, where he wrote a series following the fictional Kent family. The very first one was called The Bastard. And once I discovered that there was Revolutionary War in that book, I started reading those and collecting them. Anything I can get my hands on. It wasn't until I was in the 4th grade that Scholastic book orders, remember those? We had gotten our little catalog in class, and I was kind of going through the book, seeing what I wanted, what I was going to beg for mom, to give me money for. And I came across a book called My Brother Sam is Dead, and it had a picture of a young man in the Revolutionary War uniform. And so I was like, oh, so I stopped and I took the time to read the tiny little blurb that it had with it. And it was supposed to be about a little boy whose older brother runs off to fight the British against their father's wishes because the father's a British sympathizer. And I went, oh, I have to have this book. So I went home, asked my mom, can I please have some money for Scholastic books? And she said, sure. She says, you can pick out, she says, 2 books. And so I was excited because the one I got was My Brother Sam is Dead. And when it finally came, because remember, it took forever back then, right? It could be like 6 to 8 weeks before you ever saw your books. I read it in one day and I finally found something I connected with, something I resonated with. Now, in that book, it's a fictional story. And it has nothing to do with the experience that I had with the past life recall. However, the fact that it was a young boy and his older brother, and the older brother wanted to go fight British. My brother wanted to kill King George, you know. So I finally found something that just resonated, and I could not put the book down. I read it over and over and over and over again. Anytime we had free reading in class, that was the book that came out. Anytime I had time at home when I wasn't out playing with my friends, that was the book I would grab. And finally, after a few months, all of a sudden it was like enough that it finally stopped the insanity, the obsession. Everything started to calm down for me. And I finally had an understanding because now I was also starting to understand about past lives and what those meant. Because remember, I had talked to dad, and he was the first one I had ever talked to that said, I believe in past lives. I believe, I had this experience. And then soon other family members were talking about it freely. I guess maybe I was just old enough to pay attention to what they were talking about because before you don't care what adults talk about. But yeah, everything just kind of calmed down. The obsession went away. So that was my very first experience. It wasn't my last, but it was the most memorable one. So if you guys have had a past life recall and you would like to share your story with me, feel free to reach out. I would love to hear from you. So that's it for now. I will talk about other past lives in another time. Love you guys. Bye.